Hello YouTube. Well, I'm going to do a series on metaethics because it's a very interesting subject. So in this introduction, I'm just going to explain what metaethics is all about, and I'll give a sort of very brief general outline of various different theories and how they relate to one another. So, what is metaethics? Well, there are three different branches of ethics, sort of three different ways of approaching it. First, there's applied ethics. This addresses particular ethical problems. So if you ask what is the right thing to do regarding abortion, the death penalty, euthanasia, sexual behaviour, animal rights, the structure of the government, free speech, all that stuff, that's all applied ethics. It deals with specific moral problems. Normative ethics is closely related, but instead of focusing on specific problems, it tries to figure out the general rules and principles that guide our behaviour. So in normative ethics, we develop general theories of ethics: utilitarianism, Kant's categorical imperative, virtue ethics, egoism, all this stuff. This is normative ethics. Normative ethics provides frameworks and theories for dealing with the problems in applied ethics. Now, metaethics is something very different to both of these. Metaethics deals with questions like, what is the meaning of moral statements? Can moral statements be true or false, correct or incorrect? Are there objective moral facts? If so, what are they like, and how do we find out about them? Is morality universal or relative? And so on. So we're not really addressing moral problems. We're not going to figure out whether abortion is right or wrong. Instead, we're asking, what does it mean to say that abortion is right or abortion is wrong? What do these statements express? I suppose there are other questions we might ask about ethics. So there's, descriptive ethics, which asks, what ethical beliefs do people actually hold? How do ethical beliefs differ across different societies? And so on. These are interesting questions, but they're not especially philosophical. They're more for psychologists and anthropologists and so on. In philosophy, we have these three branches of applied, normative, and metaethics. Also, I should add that in philosophy, we don't draw a distinction between ethics and morality. I've sometimes seen people do this online. I think I once saw somebody say that morality has religious connotations, whereas ethics doesn't. That might be true for everyday discourse, but forget about it in philosophy. I use ethics and morality interchangeably. They mean the same thing. Right. The primary split in metaethics is between cognitivism and non-cognitivism. Suppose I say Cecil Taylor is a musician. What's going on here? What does this mean? Well, it's pretty simple. I'm expressing a belief about the world. I'm making a statement about the world. I'm describing the world. I'm saying that a certain object, namely Cecil Taylor, has a certain property, namely being a musician. What I say is either true or false. As a matter of fact, it's true. Cecil Taylor is a musician. He's a very good one. But now consider a moral claim, such as abortion is wrong. Does this express a belief about the world? Is this true or false? Cognitivism is the view that moral statements are truth-apt. That is, they can be true or false. So statements like abortion is wrong are not fundamentally different in kind from statements like Cecil Taylor is a musician. When I say abortion is wrong, I express a belief about abortion, namely that it has the property of wrongness. Non-cognitivism is the view that moral statements are not truth-apt. They're neither true nor false. So when I say abortion is wrong, I'm not expressing a belief about abortion. I'm doing something else. For example, I might be expressing my emotional disapproval of abortion. Abortion is wrong might mean something like boo to abortion. Or maybe I'm expressing a command not to abort. So abortion is wrong means don't abort. And obviously we can't say that statements like boo to abortion are true or false. It wouldn't make any sense to say that that's true or false. That's just an expression of your emotional attitudes. So we'll explore the varieties of non-cognitivism a little bit more later. The point for now is simply that non-cognitivists hold that moral statements are not true or false. They don't express beliefs. They don't attempt to describe the world. So here's a chart, and here's a moral statement. Now, cognitivists put moral statements in the first column. Non-cognitivists put them in the second. Okay? So I hope that should make it reasonably clear. Oh, I should note that in philosophy, the technical term for a statement that is either true or false is proposition. It's worth bearing this in mind because cognitivism is often defined as the view that moral statements express propositions, non-cognitivism as the view that they do not express propositions. Okay, so with that distinction in mind, let's outline some of the main views. This is just a basic lay of the land. I'm going to be very brief, by no means exhaustive. I'll explore all of this in more detail in later videos. I just thought it would be worth getting a general idea of where various positions lie. So I'm going to draw up a chart which is basically the one given by Alex Miller in his Introduction to Contemporary Metaethics. So there are a few questions we can ask then about the nature of moral statements. The first is, are moral statements truth-apt? If yes, cognitivism; if no, non-cognitivism. So if we're a cognitivist, we can then ask, well, if moral statements are truth-apt, are any moral statements true? Right? And some people say no. Some people say that all moral statements are false. This is known as the moral error theory, and it's most strongly associated with J.L. Mackie. So take any moral statement. Abortion is morally wrong. Abortion is morally permissible. It is good to give to charity. Slavery is evil. We have a duty not to kill innocent people. Well, all these claims are false. Every single moral statement, they're all false. The basic argument here is that when I make a moral statement such as abortion is wrong, I purport to describe an objective feature of the world. I'm saying that abortion has the property of wrongness. But there are no such features. Nothing has the property of being right, wrong, good or bad. So moral values are not fundamentally different from unicorns or phlogiston. They just don't exist. So the error theorist has to defend two basic claims. First, he has to show that moral statements should be taken at face value. So it's certainly true that superficially, abortion is wrong looks like it has the same structure as Cecil Taylor as a musician. It looks like it expresses a belief about the world. The error theorist has to show that this superficial appearance is correct. And next he must show that we have no good reason to believe that there are any objective moral values. So that's error theory. If we accept that some moral statements are true, the next question is, what exactly makes them true? Are moral properties objective, independent of people's opinions? If we answer no to this, we have various forms of subjectivism or relativism. So, individualist subjectivism is the claim that what makes moral statements true or false is just the attitudes of the individuals who utter them. So if I say abortion is wrong, I mean nothing more than I disapprove of abortion. The truth of moral statements is relative to the individual. My friend might think that abortion is perfectly acceptable. In that case, abortion is wrong is false for him, even though it's true for me. On the other hand, there's cultural subjectivism or cultural relativism. This is a view that moral statements are made true or false by the attitudes of the culture as a whole. In societies that disapprove of abortion, abortion is wrong is true. In societies that approve of it, it's false. I should point out that it's important to distinguish descriptive relativism from metaethical relativism. It is a fact that different people in different cultures have quite radically different moral systems, but it doesn't follow from this that nobody is objectively right or wrong. After all, in many cultures it's believed that the Earth is the centre of the universe, but that's just incorrect. Similarly, their moral views could just be incorrect. So descriptive relativism doesn't entail metaethical relativism. If we want to hold that the truth of moral statements is relative to individuals or cultures, we need better arguments than that. But anyway, that's subjectivism, relativism. On the other hand, if we think that moral properties are objective, then we have moral realism. So moral realism says that some moral statements are true, and that they are true in virtue of mind-independent features of the world. So it doesn't matter what anybody thinks of them. If a moral realist believes that abortion is wrong, he will say that abortion is wrong and that's that. Even if everybody in the world believed that abortion was perfectly acceptable, abortion would still be morally wrong. Abortion has the property of wrongness, the mind-independent property of wrongness. So moral realism would draw the strongest connection between statements like Cecil Taylor is a musician and moral statements. Cecil Taylor is a musician. That's a property he has no matter what anybody thinks about it. For a moral realist, moral values are features of the world no less real than gravity or solidity, whatever. So if we're moral realists, the next question is, are moral properties natural properties? Well, actually, the first question is, what's the distinction between a natural and a non-natural property? And that's a very difficult question, which I don't really have time to explore here. But a simple way of thinking about this is to say that natural properties are those properties that feature in a scientific description of the world. Natural properties are those that we come to know about through empirical study. Obviously, this is a bit woolly because, science changes. Science 100 years in the future may have a very different set of properties to science today. So another suggestion might be that natural properties are those that are directly or indirectly detectable by the senses. Chairs and mountains are directly detectable, protons and genes are indirectly detectable. We use our senses to come to recognise these, so these are part of the fabric of the natural world. Again, this is quite vague, but hopefully you have some idea of the distinction that we're driving at here. So an example of a natural property would be, for example, pleasure. Some people, if they accept a very simple version of utilitarianism, may say that moral goodness is just pleasure. The morally right action is the one that maximises pleasure, because pleasure is the intrinsic good. Pleasure is a perfectly standard property. There's nothing ghostly about it, nothing unusual. It's natural. So moral naturalism says that moral properties are natural properties. This is appealing to many people because it allows that morality could become a science. I suppose probably the most famous exponent of moral naturalism these days is Sam Harris. He thinks that moral good and moral bad can be measured scientifically and empirically because goodness and badness are natural features of the world. I think he says something, goodness is well-being or goodness is flourishing or something like that. Anyway, on the other hand, non-naturalism says that although there are moral properties, they're very different from natural properties. They don't figure in a scientific picture of the world. There are more things in Earth than are dreamt of in your sciences. So that's a very brief outline of some cognitivist positions. What about non-cognitivism? Well, the question here is, if moral statements don't express beliefs, if they can't be true or false, then what are they doing? Well, one of the earliest non-cognitivist theories was emotivism, which was developed by A.J. Ayer and C.L. Stevenson. Emotivism is the view that moral statements express emotional attitudes. So abortion is wrong basically just means abortion, boo to abortion. I should just note here, because I think some people can get confused on this point, it's important to distinguish non-cognitivist views like emotivism from individualist subjectivism. Basically the difference is this. According to individualist subjectivism, when I make a moral statement, I'm reporting or describing my moral views. So abortion is wrong means I disapprove of abortion. And that can be true or false. I can be speaking honestly or I can be lying. But according to emotivism, moral statements don't report or describe anything. They're simply expressions of emotion. If I eat some celery and I don't like celery, I might say, ugh, gross. Well, notice I'm not really reporting anything here. I'm not saying I don't like celery. I'm just expressing a negative reaction. According to emotivism, that's pretty much what moral statements are like. I know this might seem like tedious hair-splitting, but the distinction between these views does become quite important later, as you'll see when we look at them in more detail. There's also prescriptivism, which claims that moral statements are really imperatives. They express commands. So abortion is wrong means do not abort. Quasi-realism was originally developed by Simon Blackburn, and I'm not really sure if this should be considered a particular view or if it's more a general project. So we often tend to act as though moral properties are real. We tend to think of moral statements as though they are true or false. Obviously, the non-cognitivist denies that they are actually true or false, but we can't deny that people often seem to treat them as true or false. Quasi-realism is the attempt to justify this practice. Moral statements have no truth value, but it's perfectly reasonable, according to the quasi-realist, to act as though they do. Quasi-realists might also attempt to justify notions like moral progress. If moral statements are neither true nor false, it's not clear how we could talk about moral progress. Surely morality doesn't get better, it just changes as people's attitudes change. But quasi-realists might try to defend moral progress and other related notions, all the ideas that seem to imply that moral properties are real. Quasi-realists will try to defend all of that talk, even though they don't actually believe that moral properties are real. We can mix and match different non-cognitivist views quite easily. You can be both an emotivist and a prescriptivist, for example, if you think that moral statements express both emotional attitudes and commands. Anyway, that's a brief overview of some of the main positions in metaethics. I know it probably seems quite abstract at the moment, but we'll explore all of these in much more detail later. It's just useful, I think, to have a general idea of where everything stands. So, to bring this introduction to a close, I thought it might be useful to mention two very important ideas in metaethics, just to get you thinking a bit more deeply about metaethical problems. And these are the is-ought gap and the fact-value distinction, which, as you'll see in later videos, play quite an important role in many of the views that I've just outlined. The is-ought gap was first stated by David Hume, and it states that we can't derive normative statements which ascribe value, which tell us what ought to be and what ought not to be, from descriptive statements, which merely tell us how the world is. In other words, we can't derive values from facts. We can't derive any moral claims from claims about how the world is. We can reason from descriptive premises to a descriptive conclusion. For example, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, Socrates is mortal. The premises and the conclusion are all descriptive, and this argument is perfectly valid. Similarly, we can reason from normative premises to a normative conclusion. You ought not to kill humans, Bob is a human, therefore you ought not to kill Bob. The first premise there and the conclusion are both normative. Now, both of these arguments are fine, they're both valid. However, Hume pointed out that very often in moral discourse, people will reason from purely descriptive statements alone to a normative conclusion. Here's a simple example. Humans will feel pain if you hit them. Frank is a human, therefore you ought not to hit Frank. The problem in this case is that the conclusion simply doesn't follow from the premises. It's not logically valid. You can't get that conclusion logically from those premises. We can try adding more descriptive premises to the argument, but the conclusion still won't logically follow. So we could add pain is a form of suffering. Humans will feel pain if you hit them. Frank is a human. Pain is a form of suffering, therefore you ought not to hit Frank. Again, the conclusion does not logically follow. We can't get that moral conclusion from those descriptive premises. Let's try again. We could add maybe Frank does not want to suffer, therefore you ought not to hit Frank. Again, the conclusion still doesn't follow. It does not matter how many facts we state in the premises. In order to derive this conclusion that we ought not to hit Frank, we would need to add a normative statement to the premises, such as you ought not to inflict pain on humans. Something like that. Now, if we add that to these premises, then we get the conclusion. But without that normative premise, we can't get the normative conclusion. So that's the is-ought gap. Cannot reason from normative statements to from descriptive statements to a normative conclusion. And actually it works the other way around as well. You couldn't reason from purely normative statements to a descriptive conclusion. But the important point here is you can't reason from descriptive statements to a normative conclusion, which suggests that descriptive statements and normative statements are very different kinds of things. As we'll see later, this has an important role to play in a lot of metaethical views. The fact-value distinction is closely related to this gap. The point here is that there is a fundamental metaphysical gap between facts and values. So take a disagreement about value judgments, such as abortion. One person says it's always wrong, another says it's always permissible. This disagreement may rest on facts. For example, maybe the extreme pro-lifer says that it's always wrong because the fetus has a functioning brain, and the extreme pro-choicer says it's always permissible because the fetus does not have a functioning brain. In this case, the disagreement concerns facts, and both parties are wrong. We can draw on the empirical sciences to show that they're wrong, because we have ways of checking brain development in the fetus. So if the morality of abortion hinges on the status of the brain, then you should be neither completely pro-life nor completely pro-choice. And we can use the empirical sciences to show this. So that would be a disagreement concerning facts. But the disagreement may be one of values. They may agree completely about all the facts of the case. They may have perfect knowledge of the fact. It could simply be that the pro-choicer holds that the woman's right to bodily autonomy trumps all other considerations, while the pro-lifer holds that the fetus has a right to life that trumps all other considerations. So this would be a difference in moral values, and the point here is that such values seem to be very, very different from all other facts. Even if the pro-choicer can be said to be correct or incorrect that bodily autonomy trumps all other considerations, it doesn't seem that the empirical sciences could show this. So moral values are very strange. Certainly, science has never been able to uncover them. Neither, of course, have logic or mathematics. So what are moral values? What does it mean to say that something is good, or that somebody has a right to do something? Where do goodness and rights come from? In our disagreement between the pro-choicer who holds that bodily autonomy is more important, and the pro-lifer who holds that the right to life is more important, what sort of things could we point to decide who's correct? And there's certainly an intuition that there really isn't much we could do here. We seem to hit a wall at this point. There don't seem to be any more facts we could appeal to, and this suggests that facts and values are two very different things. Well, that's something to think about there. There's a great deal of controversy about both of these ideas, by the way. Not everybody accepts them, and we'll talk about that later. But that's enough for today. I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.